worldviews. How do I know which worldview can actually be trusted? Well, I'm going to give you 4 criteria that you can run any worldview through. So stay tuned on Apologetics for You. Hey, what's going on, everybody, man? It is Pastor Tanks of Apologetics for You, and I'm so excited to be able to bring you part 4 of understanding apologetics. And so last time we were together, we talked about worldviews, and I know that probably left you trying to figure out, well, how do I know what worldview I can actually trust? How do I know which worldview I can believe? With there being so many worldviews out here, how do we know that the Christian worldview specifically is one that is trustworthy? And so today I'm going to look at 4 criteria that you can run any worldview through to test it, to find out if it is plausible or if it is something that can be trusted. Now, there are a few more than 4. However, for the sake of this video and to make sure that we keep it within some type of reasonable time constraint, I'm only going to look at 4. And we're going to look at the one criteria that is pretty much ask the question, does it actually explain what it seeks to explain? Does it actually explain what it seeks to explain? So in other words, the idea is if what I'm trying to explain to you or trying to communicate that this worldview is the question and is going to answer, the question is, well, does it actually answer the question? Right? The other one I want to look at is internal logical consistency. Internal logical consistency. And this one is pretty much basic. What it simply says is within the worldview, does it contradict itself? Within the worldview, does it contradict itself? And then we want to look at existential viability. And essentially what that means is, does it commit philosophical hypocrisy, right? Does it have to adjust itself in order to live out its worldview? And I'll explain that in a minute. And then the last one is really simple. The last one is it simple enough to understand? Is it so complicated that it's actually unintelligible, right? And so we want to talk about, does it actually explain what it seeks to explain? Does it commit logically? Is it logically consistent? Is it existentially viable? And does it actually explain it? Is it simple, or is it so complicated that when you walk away from it, the only reason you think that it is plausible is because you really don't even understand what it just said to begin with? And so what we're going to do is we're going to look at postmodernism as an example of how these criteria work. We're going to look at postmodernism as an example of how these ideas work. And when we talk about postmodernism, just to give you some quick background with it, it came on the scene rushing like a hurricane. And essentially it came on the scene to address what many people thought modernity had failed to address. The different things in society that was not addressed. They figured, man, listen, we need to create a new system that will actually address these things. And so postmodernism became the new worldview that was meant to fix the things that the old view did not address. Currently, we are in what we would call this postmodern society. And the reality is, it's really hard to actually define postmodernism. And you'll find out that right there alone creates this failure within a system. You can't really define what it is. In fact, the reason that you can't define what it is because it's pretty much all over the place, and it carries a wide variety of thoughts and opinions. So philosophy, architecture, film, music, literature, sociology, critical theory, all of these things are pieces of postmodernism, and they all lend to the definition of it, right? However, here's what we actually know about postmodernism. We know that postmodernism is just very destructive, right? It's going to be anti-everything, anti-Christian, anti-biblical, anti-morality, anti-lawfulness, right? And so if you think about the world we're living in right now, are we not living in that type of culture where everything is anti? We're anti this, we're anti that, we're anti this, we're anti that. We're so anti everything that we actually stand for nothing. And so that is essentially the postmodern worldview. And again, it is not a very easy thing to define, or a worldview to define. And since this is not an apologetics against postmodernism, I'm not going to go into the complexities of it, but I just want to let you know that it's an anti-everything. It's a movement that was created to answer problems that they felt another worldview did not address. And so we're going to look at this idea of postmodernism in light of those four criteria. And so simply what we're going to do is we're going to take the first one. We're going to take the whole idea of does it explain what it ought to explain, right? And so that's the first criteria that we're going to use. Does it explain what it ought to explain, right? And the idea is this: if a worldview asserts an essential proposition, so let's say X is utterly mysterious or intelligible and it sheds no light on anything, then X is not plausible. It's actually a strike against the worldview. And so according to this criteria, postmodernism is in violation of this. One of the things that I pointed out, right, in the summary of what the worldview is that it's hard to define and to understand. Well, according to the criteria, postmodernism is so mysterious and unintelligible that it simply can't be understood. And since it can't be understood, it can't explain what it ought to explain. And so consider the whole idea of truth and subjective truth and relative truth, right? This is actually something that finds itself in the bed of the postmodern worldview. Well, the problem is it teaches that what we know, we really don't know that we actually know it. And that sounds good. And we've all encountered somebody who has held this view. Well, how do you really know what you know? We really don't know anything. And they start to regurgitate this kind of postmodern mindset and thinking about truth. And while it sounds good, it doesn't shed any light on the worldview, right? And in fact, it confuses more than it explains. Because the reality is, if nobody knows what any sort of truth is, then how do we even know that the thing that you're saying is actually true? So in actuality, the defining understanding of truth actually eliminates your truth. So how did that actually explain anything? You see how that works, right? Does it explain what it actually tries to explain, right? And so the second thing that you will look at is internal logical consistency, right? And essentially what this says is that are there elements of a worldview and they must be in accord with one another without contradiction. And essentially what that means is if inside of a worldview, there's a position that is being held and there is another position that's being held, if the two positions contradict each other, then the worldview has violated logical consistency, meaning this: they cancel each other out, which then again goes back to the first criteria. Then how did it actually explain anything, right? In other words, this criteria is we look at it from epistemology, right? And so postmodernism expresses almost this disdain for any idea of truth, right? Looking back at the truth conversation, right? And so unfortunately, one of the questions without any ultimate truth within postmodernism is, how is it possible to actually define truth? How is it possible to actually hold a definition of truth? Well, the problem is it creates a contradiction. Well, how does it create a contradiction? Well, because if you're going to claim that the worldview is true, while within the worldview claiming that we cannot know truth, then how do we even know that your worldview is true? So there is a component of the worldview that is self-defeating to the definition of the worldview. And if they are if you have anything within the worldview self-defeating the actual worldview, then the worldview is not consistent with itself. It is illogical, and anything that is illogical when we're talking about a worldview must be rejected. And so you evaluate these worldviews according to their claims. Do their claims contradict one another? The other one is existential viability. Right? And what this means is, does it commit philosophical hypocrisy? Which means, do you have to double think it in order to live out the worldview? Right? And we're going to go back, right? We're going to keep looking at this truth idea. Do I have to double think it in order to live it? Right? And so here's the thing. If truth is relative, then to make a truth claim means that a person has to double think to live within the worldview. Right? Because if truth is relative, meaning it is according to you, it is not absolute, right? Then that means that in order to make a truth statement, I have to double think it. In other words, I have to cancel itself out, or I have to be double-minded in my ways, meaning I have to claim that truth is relative while trying to also convince you that the truth I'm communicating to you is actually absolute. So how do I know that truth is relative? Well, you're trying to tell me that truth is relative, but I thought that even that is a relative truth. Well, no, this is not a relative truth. This is true. Truth is relative, but I thought all truth is relative. And that means even what you just said to me is relative, and I shouldn't actually have to hold it as truth. Well, no, you do have to hold it as truth. You see what I'm saying? I know I'm talking in circles. I'm doubling back over my own language, and you're looking at me right now like that doesn't make any sense. I know. And that's why that worldview doesn't make any sense. It is not existentially viable, right? And that's one of the biggest hypocrisies in the postmodern worldview, but it's also a big hypocrisy in many of the worldviews that are birthing themselves in modernity, right? You listen to them talk and you're listening to the things that you're saying and you're like, but you can't even believe that to hold to your view. You're double-minded in your understanding, because by definition of what you just said, the thing that you just tried to convince me of doesn't even work itself. You have just, again, here's that word, self. And the last one is there a simpler explanation? And is it unnecessarily complex? So if we're looking at postmodernism, does anything that I've actually said seem simple? Or does it seem like you need to go get 18,000 books to try to possibly begin to understand what this worldview means? Well, the idea is anything that's that complex that it actually can't be understood is a worldview that we should not adapt. Well, why? How do I adopt something that I don't even understand? And no matter how many times somebody tried to explain it to me, it still just doesn't make any sense. It is. And here's the other thing. There's a much simpler explanation for this. Okay, let me demonstrate this outside of postmodernism. You ever heard the conversation around the King James only debate, right? And one of the things when you look at textual families, the Alexandrian text and the Byzantine text, we have more manuscripts in the Byzantine text, which comes later than the Alexandrian text. And so some would say that then we should be translating only from this Byzantine text family, because the majority of our Greek text comes there, right? Now, the reality, though, is that though the Alexandrian text is closer to the dating of the actual events that we're reading about in the Bible, it has a fewer body of the Greek manuscripts. Well, the question becomes why? Well, the reality is those who are King James only, they would say because people realized that the Alexandrian text family was corrupt, and so they just stopped dealing with it. but instead, the reality is that it's because by that time the language had moved from Greek speaking to more Latin speaking, right? And because it had moved to more Latin speaking, however, there was a group of individuals who fought to maintain the Greek speaking language through all of the invasions, i.e. the Byzantine empires and all of them. And so they had lasted longer in keeping with the Koine Greek when those of the Alexandrian family or Northern Africa had already been invaded and Latin had become the primary language. So one text family had more time to continue to write in Greek, while the other, that Greek language had fell off. And so there's less, if that makes sense. Well, a KJ, the only individual, would say that it's because it's corrupt and people knew that it was corrupt and they came in and so they stopped using it. Well, there's a lot of assumptions that have to be made to hold to that view, right? There's a much simpler way to explain why one has more than the other. And I just explained it. It's about when the language shifted as being the dominant used language in this family, this Alexandrian text family, Northern Africa, versus how long they were still using Greek and writing in Greek before they finally themselves converted over to the Latin text. And so that's a much simpler way to explain than a conspiracy that it was just corrupt and somebody felt it was corrupt. And so you get what I'm saying? So is there a simpler way to explain this instead of all of the confusion, the conspiracy theories that's unprovable, that you can't fact check? Well, if there's a simpler way to explain it, then maybe the fact that you're using all of this complication to explain it is a sign that the worldview is actually not plausible. And so to get you to adopt it, they just confuse you and make you seem like you just don't have the ability to understand it. And I put a name out there when you listen to a lot of the brothers in the conscious movement and you listen to Brother Polite in them, and they sound really deep. But do you really know what they just said? Well, no, you don't. It just seems so deep. You just think it's so deep, but it's really not deep at all. It's just unintelligible. And so that is an example of, is there a simpler explanation or is it unnecessarily complex, right? And so those are 4 criterias that I wanted to come on here quickly to give you that you can examine worldviews through. Does it explain what it ought to explain, right? Does it commit internal logical consistency? Is it existentially viable? And is there a simpler explanation, or is it unintelligibly, or does it have all of this unnecessary complex reasoning, right? Those 4 alone, if you just evaluate a worldview through it, you'll begin to be able to identify worldviews that should be rejected. And so that's just 4. And again, there are about 8 total if you really wanted to get into it. But I just wanted to give you 4 simple ones that if you just began to go through the worldviews that you're hearing and just to test them with those criteria, you begin to see how crazy they sound. Now, what I will do is in a blog on the website that is coming very soon, I will do a blog or a journal article spelling out all 8 of them in depth, where you can be able to read that and have that on your own. But for today, those are the 4 that I wanted to give you. And so this was part 4 of understanding apologetics. And listen, I thank you guys for tuning in. I pray that these videos are helping you or blessing you. Obviously, I don't go as deep into these videos as I could. We try to keep them short enough that you'll actually watch them, and impactful enough that you can leave away with something that will help you understand apologetics or engage in the conversations that are happening in the marketplace. And so I pray that you are blessed. And if you are, do me a favor. Make sure that you subscribe. Make sure that you share. Make sure that you like. Make sure that you leave a comment. We have so much that we are planning to do with this Apologetics for You platform, from providing journal articles and blogs. We're working on the website right now where you'll be able to subscribe to the website and you'll be able to get journal articles, and I write all the time, and you'll be able to get my fuller understanding on different topics and different subjects. You'll be able to submit a topic that you would like for me to either blog or write about, and you'll have all of that content because you are a part of our Apologetics for You family. So stay tuned to that, and stay tuned to when that drops. And so you're going to want to make sure that you're following me on Instagram. I am Pastor Tank. You want to make sure that you're following me on Facebook, Leonard Jr. Tanks, because that is where you'll begin to get all of that information. But listen, I thank you guys for tuning in. I pray that that video has blessed you, and I'll be seeing you soon next time on Apologetics for You.